Hey everybody, it's Monique with Made with Accuquilt, a friendly support group. And last week I asked you again to tell me some suggestions for dies that you would like me to have a closer look at. And so this week I decided to try out the Arkansas Traveler because a number of people had asked for that one. I had never used mine yet, so it was a great opportunity to pull it out. And I think it's so cute. I'm always so pleased when I pull out a die that I haven't tried. And it's like, why didn't I pull this one out sooner? Because I think it's just adorable. So I always like to use pretty fabrics when I'm making my test blocks. I don't want to use, I mean, these are still like small, scrappy things, but I want to use something pretty. Even though I'm only making one, I don't want to use ugly fabrics because then I won't like the block. So here is the Arkansas Traveler. It makes a 12-inch finished block, and it comes on this die board, which is 6 by 24 inches, and so works with all cutters, even your little Go Baby or Go Me. And so what I started with, well, obviously I pulled out my instructions because every time that I buy any die, I right away download the instructions from Accuquilt and put them in page protectors and put them in a binder so that I have them just in case they get discontinued and then the instructions are no longer available. So I definitely recommend that you do the same thing. And so what I started with on my die, because I do this with all my dies, I measured the shapes and then I wrote the measurements right on my die. You don't have to do that if you don't want to, because Accuquilt tells you what fabric, what size to cut your fabric into, to rough cut your fabric into, but I like having my measurements right on my die. And so I measured A, which is going to be a whole entire section like this. And then I measured B and BR, which stands for B reversed, and I measured C. And so for this block, you are actually going to need a B and B reversed for each block, for each one of these sections. So that means you need four of each, sorry. So 8 altogether, 4 of each. You're going to need 4 C's. They are going to go in between here. And you're going to need 16 A's, which are the diamonds. And because this is a bob, block on board, you'll be able to cut all your shapes for one block in one pass through the cutter, which is fantastic, of course. You don't have to do that if you don't want to, but you can. So in this block, it doesn't have to be this way, but for starters, when you're first starting your block, I would recommend that you do the same thing as Accuquilt did. And they made C and B in reverse the background. And so that's what I did. So my background is the white, which is the C and the B in reverse. And then I chose some fun fabrics to make the diamonds. And what you need to do is cut 4 diamonds of one color, cut 8 diamonds of a second color, and then cut 4 diamonds of a third color. And then you're going to cut your background pieces. What is nice about this is that because I need 4, I was able to cut my green piece of fabric, my size that I measured, and lay it on here. And it doesn't matter if you lay it right side up or right side down, because this is a symmetrical die cut, so it doesn't matter. And for green, I needed 4, so I laid 1 piece of green on here, which would cut my 4 pieces I needed. And I needed 4 reds, and so I was able to lay 1 piece of red on here to cut my 4 reds. And then I needed 8 blues, so I laid 2 layers of blue on here, so I could cut 8 of my blue diamonds. And that was only 4 layers of fabric, which is still totally fine to put on a die and run through your cutter, because you can run 6, right? So I only had 4, so I was good to go there. And what's nice about B and B in reverse is that sometimes with certain dies you might have to fan fold in order to get the reverse shape. Well, Accuquilt actually made B and B reversed there. They put it right on there for you, so you're just going to lay your fabric right side up and you're going to cut 4 of each to go on each of these quadrants, and then you're going to cut 4 C's. And again, this one doesn't matter because it is symmetrical shape. It doesn't matter if it goes face up or face down. And of course, if you're using something like white, it doesn't matter whether it's up or down because you can't tell anyway. So super simple, just measure, lay your pieces on, and then cut. And then I highly recommend that you lay everything out. This block was not tricky at all. It was very easy to have it come out looking really great, but you do want to lay out your pieces, and I recommend that you pin and that you lay back your pieces every time that you're done with them, just to make sure that you keep all these little pieces in the right spot. Because this block, it's really hard when you're laying out your rough cut pieces, or not your rough cut, but your cut out pieces. It is really hard to see that it's square because there's so many pieces there. So definitely lay them out once you're finished sewing certain units, subunits, and then make sure it all still looks okay. Okay, so we're going to go over, I've already rough cut my pieces of fabric, and I'm going to go over to the cutting machine, and I am going to show you how I cut my fabric, because it's a little bit different than some suggestion that I gave you last week on how you should place your fabric on the die. So let me focus on that when we're over at the cutting machine. All right, so we're over at my cutter, and as you can see, I'm using the Go Me because the die will fit through there just fine. And I have my fabric already sub-cut, and I need 4 of shape C, and I made sure that my selvage is here. I actually cut it off the bolt with my selvage being, on the top, so that I know it's on right. And I have 4 layers here because I need 4 of C. And then last week I told you that when you are laying your fabric on a die, that you should line up your fabric with the blade rather than the edge of the die. So normally I would say to you, lay your fabric on like this, in angle with a die, except that there's an angle going this way and there's an angle going this way, and so you can't really line it up with both. And so what I did, I just laid it on here straight. So it is actually in line with the edge of my die board, and that seemed to work just fine. So I'm going to lay my 4 shapes on here, and then I'm going to just run it through using my 6x12 mat. And so I'm only going to cut C right now. And you can of course lay all your shapes on here right away, all your fabric, but I'm going to show you a little trick that I learned. And I'm actually going to turn my die around, because if I was going to start cutting with all this fabric right here, right at the beginning of my cutter, it might create a little speed bump. So I'm going to actually go like this and push my die through until I get to my mat, and then I'm going to start rolling it. Makes it a little bit simpler for the machine to cut my shapes. All right. And my room is very staticky today, so I'm going to try and keep my shapes on the die board, but I'm not sure that it's going to work. There we go. All right, so I've cut my 4 shapes C, and I want to show you a little trick that I used. And if you don't want to use this, don't feel like you have to. But if you want to, I thought it might save a little bit of fabric. And I have a little thread caught over here, so I'm just going to snip that with my scissors. You don't want to pull that. Okay, so there are my C shapes. And then I was looking at, my leftover fabric when I first got my C shapes. And I thought, boy, I wonder if I could use this fabric and cut my B and B reversed. And so that's what I did. So I cut my C apart like this, and then cut it apart like this. And then I was able to use my leftovers from cutting C, and I was able to cut my B and B reversed. And remember, I need 4 of each, and I already had 4 layers. And so this time I did, I really don't think it mattered. I don't think I paid attention. I just laid it on here to cover the shape. And I'm just going to do the one side because this is 4 layers. And if I overlap, because they're attached, if I overlap, I'm going to have 8 layers of fabric. and I don't want to have that happen. So I'm going to just do one at a time. So I'm going to lay it like this, slide it through as far as I can until I get to the mat. Very staticky in here today. All right, so there is my B reversed shape. Just using my scraps from C. And then now I'm going to do the other one, the B shape, but it wouldn't matter which way I put it on here because I'm using a solid white, and so there is no right side or wrong side. Okay, so I'm going to put this one on here, making sure that I'm covering the whole entire shape. Now, like I said, you don't have to do that. If you are worried about, messing that up, just rough cut your shape for B, whatever your measurement is, and then just use that. You don't have to worry about using your leftover C pieces at all if you don't want to. Okay, this one had some issues cutting, so I'm going to have to trim all these little threads quickly. This one had a lot of issues cutting. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes you have some blades that are not quite cutting well, or it could be that my fabric might be damp. And then just trim them with a pair of scissors. All right, so there I have my B and my B reversed shapes right there. And now I just need to cut A. And for A, I need to cut 4 of one color and then 4 of another color. I'm gonna make sure that's not 2 layers. Making sure that I'm covering all my shapes because my green is a little bit longer than my blue. Okay, and then I need 2 of a different color again because I have to cut 8 of the same color diamonds. Okay, and all my fabric is face up, although it doesn't matter because they are symmetrical shapes. All right, so now I have 4 layers on there. I'm going to run that through, and then I'll have the 16 diamonds that I need to make this block. Okay, that one came out perfectly. So I have 8 of these, and then 4 of the blue and 4 of the green, and that's all I need to make one block. So I'm going to go and lay it out now, and then I'll show you again, and then we'll start sewing. Okay, so I'm back at my sewing table today, and I have all my pieces cut for my Arkansas Traveler block. I have my diamond shapes, and I have my background pieces, C and B reversed. Now remember that for B and B reversed, I'm actually using a solid, and so it doesn't matter which way my fabric faces, so that makes it a little easier. And this is the block that I am going to make for me. I'm going to make a Christmas table runner, and I wanted to use these fabrics. So I made one test block already just to see if I would like it. And so I'm going to highly recommend that you lay out your pieces for your block every time and only sew certain parts of it every time and then lay them back, because it can be very easy to sew the wrong pieces together. And there's a lot of pieces in this block. So I have my pattern and my binder sitting right there for reference, and we're going to lay out our pieces right now. And so we're going to start with C, which is the background. and C has these big triangle shapes. And then we have to put down our diamonds, our small diamonds. And I use directional fabric for my block, which is not what I would recommend because it makes it more tricky, but I want to use this fabric because it's gorgeous. And so I have decided that my directional fabric is all going to point outwards, out from the center of my block. And you can choose to do what you want if you're using directional fabric, of course. So this is all pretty self-explanatory, I think. You're going to lay them out. This actually, they all fit nicely within the C shapes. And, you know, I don't think that this is going to be the confusing part, really. Oh, that's such pretty fabric. I just love it. All right, and then for my outer points, I am using this dark green, which I'll pop into place here. And then the only thing we are missing is the B and B reversed shapes, which I have right here. And so I always tell you, you know, once you lay out your pieces, check and make sure that it looks like it's going to be a square. Well, this doesn't look anywhere close to a square, and I'm afraid that when you add the B pieces, it's not going to look close to a square either because there's so many seams that need to get sewn. So what I want you to remember about the B shapes is that they have a kind of a straight edge, and then they have an angled side. And so your straight edge is going to go to the outside of your block. And what I want you to remember is that the skinny part is going to go to the outside point of your block. So basically this is where B would go. And then B reversed would go in this direction here, like this. So the skinny part's towards the point of my diamond, and the straight edge is right there on the outside. So I'm going to go around and do that for all my B and B reversed pieces. And you can see that this does not look at all like it's going to turn into a square block, but it does. I'm a little tight on space up there. All right, so I have my block laid out, and you can of course double check, you know, on your pattern too. I just want to double check and make sure that all my diamonds are in the correct position. And now I'm ready to start sewing. And the way that you're going to start sewing is by sewing your diamonds together like this. And so you have them laying out like this, lay them on top of each other, and then you can pin them just to remind yourself which side you are sewing. Because this is not a hard block to sew. It comes together really easily, but I think it's easy to get confused about which side you are sewing together. So I'm sewing those two together, and then I am sewing these two together. And then after I'm done sewing, I'm going to press the seams open, because I find that my block ends up truer to size when I press the seams open as much as possible. So after I'm done sewing these, then they get sewn to each other to make our bigger diamond. So I'm not going to make you watch me sew these because that'd be terribly boring, but I'll come back and show you once I've sewn my two diamonds together. Okay, so I have sewn my two sets of diamonds together, and I've pressed the seam open, and now I'm going to lay them back into position just to make sure that I don't mess anything up. And so they're going to go like this. And now what we're going to do, we're going to sew these together to make a big diamond. And this is really easy because all your edges are already cut off. So there's no dog ears, and so you're going to line up this edge over here, and you're going to line up this edge over here, and these seams on both sides will be a little bit offset by about 1/4 inch, so that when you sew it, they'll hopefully end up being perfectly aligned when you open it up. So I'm going to do that, and then I'll show you the result. All right, so I've sewn my diamond together, and my points look really good and lined up really nicely. I do recommend that you pin, even though I'm not a big fan of pinning. And now the next step is to sew on B and B reversed, but you have to do one at a time because you actually want to press towards B, okay? And you can't do both of them at the same time. So you're just going to choose which one you want to do first. It doesn't really matter. And they line up perfectly. This edge is perfectly aligned with this edge, and this one should be perfectly aligned with this edge. And then, make this, pin it and make sure that it all goes nicely. And you're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam and press it towards the background, and or open, I suppose. And then you're going to come back and you're going to do the other one in the same manner. And so really self-explanatory, except that you have to just do one at a time, press it, open or away, and then do the other one. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a minute. All right, I have sewn my B and B reversed shapes on, and I actually thought I would try pressing them open. I don't find that works as well. My block doesn't want to lay as flat, and so I think for my next one I'm going to press them to the background fabric again. But now what you have to do, you've done your diamond shape, and now you have to sew your C shape to your diamond shape. And you're just going to choose whether you want to sew this shape or this C shape on. It doesn't matter, but you're just going to have a diamond shape and a C shape sewn together, and you're going to make 4 of those units. So I'm going to choose to do this one. And again, this one is super simple to line up. You're just going to match your edges, and they should match up perfectly. And I definitely would recommend pinning because it's kind of a long way to go. And there are no seams to worry about here, obviously, because there's no seam in this. You will be crossing some seams on the back, but there's nothing to match up. So you just have to match up your 2 edges and then sew a 1/4 inch seam, and then I would recommend you press towards the background fabric, towards C. All right, our first quadrant is done. I have sewn my diamonds together. I've sewed on B and B reverse, and I've sewed on the C shape. And I know it still doesn't look like it's all going to work out, but trust me, it will. And so here's our first 1/4 of a block, and you're going to do the same steps with all the other blocks. And like I said, I highly recommend you just do one quadrant at a time, just so you don't accidentally sew the wrong piece together. But if you're comfortable chain sewing, chain piecing, then go ahead and do that. And I'm going to do that for my blocks, and then I'll show you how they get put together. All right, I have gone ahead and sewn all my quadrants together, and I made sure that they're all facing the correct position. And as you can see, they're angled, and just like with the Morning Star block. And so now what you're going to do, you're going to sew your 2 halves together, and I highly recommend pinning. They should line up really nicely, and I would press those seams towards the background, towards C. So you're going to do that for both of them. And then when you have sewn both halves together, you're going to sew those 2 halves together to make one entire block. So super easy. I'm not going to show you the in-between step. I mean, you're going to sew a 1/4 inch seam. The only thing I will hint about, the only thing, a suggestion I will make, is that it's easier to start sewing on the outside because you only have 2 pieces of fabric out there. When you start sewing on the inside here, there are a lot of seams that kind of meet together, and I found that my sewing machine was having a hard time getting over all those. Now you can start with a scrap little piece of fabric to sew first, or just start sewing on the outside and sew towards the inside, which I think made it easier. So go ahead and sew those 2 halves together, and then sew your 2 halves together, or sew your 2 quarters together, and then sew your 2 halves together to make one entire block. I have finished sewing together my 4 quarters and then my 2 halves, and here is my finished block. And I went and measured it, and it's pretty darn close to 12.5 unfinished, so I'm happy with that. The back, when you try and press the seams towards C, there's a problem in the middle because, you know, there's a lot of seams meeting there. So I just kind of smushed that part. I believe that is a technical term. I'm sure that Eleanor Burns has used that term before, so I just kind of smushed that center piece while I pressed everything else towards the C triangles. And it seems to lay pretty flat. I don't think it's going to cause me any problems. So anyway, smush that center piece unless you want to press your seams open. So there is my finished block, and I have to make a few more in order to make a table runner. And here is the original one that I had tried out with my fabrics just to make a sample block. So I hope you'll give this block a try. It really is not a hard block at all. I think it looks super cool, and you just want to use pins, and you want to just pay attention to where you're laying your pieces, and so just follow the directions on the Accuquilt instruction sheet. So I hope you will give it a try.